Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Today on the show, we have Sirgun Kaur Khalsa from Arizona, who after a home birth transfer with her first child, decided to free birth her second child with just her husband. After carrying past 42 weeks, her nervous midwife called 911 towards the end of her labor, and Sirgun experienced a dramatic transfer, resulting in unnecessary intervention and obstetrical abuse. Thankfully, following her intuition with her second pregnancy, she tells the story of her healing and powerful birth at home on her terms.
My first birth experience with my 4-year-old, he's 4 now, was the experience was totally different from my last birth. So I've had 2 in just the way that it started, because we weren't planning it. We thought we were being really careful not to get pregnant. I was about a year into my marriage, little less. And we were both older. My husband's 6 years older than I am. I was 28 at the time. So it wasn't like a bad time to have children, or, it wasn't like we felt unprepared to do that, but it was just a surprise. And it's still super mysterious when the conception date was, because when the conception time should have been, we were sleeping in separate beds working at a festival. So it was like just super mysterious.
Interesting.
And, when I got home from the festival, I was used to being really tired after working there, because it's super long hours and a lot of interaction with people, which is difficult for me, that much of it. And so I'm used to getting back and just kind of sleeping for a few days. Right. But the tiredness did not seem to go away. And I'm here, I'm wondering, I'm like, gosh, do I have like some sort of flu, or, what's going on? Cause I've never been pregnant, so I didn't know what that felt like. And, I wasn't really keeping, super great tabs on my cycle or anything like that. Cause it had been irregular. And anyway, I can't remember how it occurred to me to take a pregnancy test, but I just decided to get one and, peed on the stick and whatever. And it came out negative. And I was like, oh, okay, well, gosh, I ruled that out. Then I seemed to be getting, a little bit nauseous. And so I was like, well, you know what, I'm just going to go and see the OB, and get like a definitive test. Cause you Google and it's like, pregnancy tests aren't always accurate, whatever. So I go to, an OBGYN back when I thought that was a necessary component in women's health. And, I peed in their cup and, came back and said, you're pregnant. And right from the moment they said that, I was just ecstatic.
Nice.
It was,
because that can go either way.
Yeah. Exactly. It was a surprise, but it was like such a, just to know, first of all, I felt, like, oh yeah, I'm not ill. But yeah, that was really exciting, because I don't think otherwise, I would have known when a good time to get pregnant was at that stage.
Yeah. Sometimes they have to decide.
Yeah. So yeah. And I think, I'm not sure, it might've been the next checkup. It was either that one or the next one where they no, it was probably the next one where they just scheduled me for a sonogram. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, and I got the picture, and I thought it was so cute and whatever. And, anyway, when I went in for, that checkup with the sonogram, I remember the woman, she wasn't the OBGYN, she was like the assistant. And I remember just getting like not a very good vibe for what I felt like was going to be the continuation of that care. And, she was talking about like the hospital birth, and I can't remember the exact wording, that kind of turned me off, but it was like, I think I'm gonna
move along.
So,
yeah.
And a lot of people in my community. So I live in a Sikh community, in like a Kundalini yoga / Sikh community in Phoenix, Arizona. And I didn't live actually physically in that community, like neighborhood wise at the time. We were about 15, 20 minutes away in North Phoenix, but now I live like right here. That was another difference between the two births, is just a different house and different community around me. But a lot of people in the community, whether in Phoenix and just the greater worldwide community, it would have home births. That was really, really typical. Right. So, and I had a friend whose mom was training to be a midwife, and I asked her a bunch of questions like, what do you look for in a midwife, and, whatever. And the first thing I remember her saying was, make sure that she's a registered, or gosh, what's the term?
Licensed, regulated.
A licensed midwife, right? So we looked at some hospitals, and we looked at some, birthing centers, and we had a couple interviews. We had actually I think 5 interviews with 5 different midwives. And I remember all of them thinking okay, I guess, it was I never fell in love, but I did this silly thing where I was like, when the baby kicks, that's the midwife. and we actually found, what I'm forgetting this part is that for a while I didn't actually look for a midwife. I was just going to a midwifery care kind of establishment. So instead of it being like an OBGYN's office, it was just a bunch of midwives, but they were, it was an office, and they took my insurance and stuff. And they used to have a birth center, but it got shut down. So it was going to be a hospital birth with one of those midwives. But I didn't like the idea that it was going to be like any one of their, 6 staff members could be with me. And I would know which one. It was whichever one was going to be on call. So that's what drove me to find a home birth midwife. So anyway, when the baby kicked, it landed on this woman during her interview with her, and she seemed nice, and I liked her office, and her husband did this kind of healing modality that I got for free, and that was I thought that was a cool perk, and it seemed to be going fine. She was really laid back. I was taking Bradley classes, which was somewhat informative, I guess, at the time. I think the general theme of this pregnancy was just learning. I hadn't done any research prior to getting into the pregnancy, so I didn't really know what paradigm I wanted to be in.
So much to learn.
Yeah, I knew enough that I didn't want to have a C-section, and I didn't want to, have medication or drugs to stop the pain and stuff. And I was really intrigued by the hypnosis idea, but I didn't end up taking those classes because my sister-in-law convinced me to take the Bradley anyway. Not that was her fault. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. We've had 2 kids. I'll do that. Yeah. So, by the time I was really pregnant, and I'd only been with my midwife for a few months at that point, because like I said, we found her kind of late. I think also I didn't feel pregnant until I was really big, because I just wasn't connected to that, my body. And so once I could actually looked pregnant, and it took me a really long time, because people kept commenting how small I was, which made me feel really not, I wasn't doing it right. So once
I know,
once
we can't win. It's either too small or too big.
I know.
No one's ever like, your belly's just quite right.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's funny because I've heard like my Bradley midwife, she said, when I've always been so big, and I always think it's like a nice thing to say when I tell a woman that she's, so small, but no, it really did make me feel inadequate.
Totally. Like you're not growing well enough.
Right. Right. So anyway, by the time I was really pregnant and I felt like, oh, okay, now I can really start preparing for the birth. It was kind of late in the game. And all I'd really learned was like, you don't need meds, and, here's how to push. That was kind of, cause I mean, all the nutrition stuff, like Bradley was so much more prep, and I've always taken such good care of my body that most of it was kind of silly for me,
sure. Or obvious,
all your nutrients and stuff. I mean, that wasn't new to me in pregnancy. It was always part of my life and taking care of myself. So yeah. So take me to the birth. Yeah. So what I have to take you a little bit before, because that's kind of what went wrong. So I had about 41 weeks, maybe 41 and a half. And my midwife is saying, well, no, we're getting to like 40 in a day, 40 and whatever. And my midwife keeps mentioning like, okay, if we go over, I'm not quite sure what she's concerned about, but she keeps mentioning this possibility of like, quote unquote, going over, and what could happen. And I think you should meet this hospital midwife just in case we get transferred. And, so I'm doing all this stuff because I'm listening to my healthcare provider like a good patient. And at 42 weeks, I'm still pregnant. So at that point, I went to do the hospital, no stress test or whatever. Yeah, they checked the fluid and whatever. And I think I'd actually done it twice before the baby was born, because she wanted me to do it every like 2 or 3 days, something like that. And I mean, at this point, because she's having me do all this stuff, it's kind of like a doctor prescribing medication to you. You assume that there's something wrong with you, because your doctor is concerned, right? Or, my midwife was concerned. So I'm thinking like, my gosh, is my body going to be able to birth? Am I, all these like stupid things are going through my head. Am I going to be pregnant forever? Like, is this baby really going to come out? At 42 weeks and I think it was either 2 or 3 days. Well, at 2 days, I thought I was going into labor, and then it didn't end up being labor. And then 3 days, it was like, okay, this is definitely happening. And my midwife came in the morning, and I was, I was relaxed and nice, and I was playing my music and whatever. And I remember her saying about the music, she was like, are you going to play this the whole time? And I was like, why? And she goes, oh, I think it's going to put you to sleep. And she was really concerned. Yeah. She was really concerned that I was going to get too relaxed. And
that's so weird.
I know. It's like, that was like number one, what went wrong.
You're like, way to kick, baby.
Yeah, it was like, because that was when I envisioned my birth, the soundtrack to it was, I'm a musician, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
The soundtrack to it was number one on my list. I ended up changing it to it was mantra music. I ended up changing it to some other like really like kind of more high energy mantra music. But I remember that really changing the energy of it. I had a birth tub. My husband set it up. He like did a whole bunch of stuff while I was birthing. He changed how the refrigerator door opened. And he doesn't like sitting around. So, but yeah, she went and picked up her daughter from school and whatever, and was, I could kind of tell was like, okay, this is going to be a long, she's thinking like, this is going to be a long birth. So I'll just get out of here and see if it progresses. And the whole time she's, doing paperwork and stuff. And I remember that making me feel a little bit uncomfortable. By the time it was getting really intense, I remember feeling like, oh my God, what is going on? It was like this sense of panic, like I was being electrocuted or something, and I was being repeatedly electrocuted. And I like in my thighs. It actually felt that way.
And you were 42 and you were past 42?
Yeah, it was 42 in 3 days by like the medical,
and
way
she
of
was
counting.
willing to stay with you?
I can't remember what.
She might have smudged the numbers or something.
No. She actually, and if I had known more, I would have helped her to do this, but she actually gave me the opportunity to do that. And I didn't get it because I'm such like an honest, I'm like like the teacher's pet that sits in the front row that used to, so, when somebody,
you were like, lie.
Of course I wouldn't do that. And why would I do that? I understand what the importance,
totally.
If I had understood what the importance of doing that was, I've been like, yeah, who cares when I got pregnant? And, but I didn't at that time. And, I think the law in Arizona is that she could stay with me, but I had to okay it. Like I had to understand that I had gone past my due date and that, that it was risky. That, that was the thing. And she at that point was like super vigilant, had to be super vigilant because if anything went wrong, she would be in big trouble, So she was under a lot of pressure because of the laws. So it was like it was a bad situation. And I wish she had also just been honest with me about, this is what I'm dealing with. And, I understand like midwives can get into some, big legal trouble that doctors can't. And I appreciate that, but I wish I had known kind of what I was agreeing.
Yeah, it's really crazy how not transparent regulated midwives are consistently.
Yeah. And I don't know what she thought. I was also thinking to myself, maybe she just thought like I have no other options. And so she has to, stay there with me or something.
She could have transferred you to...
She could have transferred me to a hospital for sure. Yeah.
But anyway, so you're in labor, you're feeling like you're being electrocuted.
Yeah. And she's crying out. I remember the only thing she really said to me during the birth was, make low sounds. Don't go so high, like make the low, cause I was going like, I'm like right before transition at this point because I remember she asked me, do you need to pee? I think she just kind of could feel where I was. And I didn't know because I'd never done it before. Going to the bathroom, cause I said, yeah, sure. I'll pee. She was like, why don't you just try? So I'm trying to pee and she's like, she gets her assistant. I really liked her assistant a lot better than her actually too. And, she put cause she was checking me with the Doppler the whole time, obviously, cause she's a licensed midwife. And, she was noticing some heart decelerations while I was transitioning on the toilet. And at this point I could tell it went from like, okay, laid back, I'm doing paperwork while she goes through her labor to like high emergency alert. And so she went and she got an oxygen tank, which ironically she had borrowed from another midwife that I had interviewed, and it was empty. So, which I guess was kind of a blessing in disguise because I learned about oxygen later, but, she didn't have the oxygen tank, so that must've freaked her out. And then I remember her telling her assistant to call an ambulance. Or maybe it was when I was, it gets a little fuzzy, but maybe it was when she got me on the bed. So after I was on the toilet in the bathroom, like way on the other side of the house, we bring me to the other side of the house where our bedroom is. She has me lay on my back, like hospital style, and with my knees up and just like start screaming, push.
Oh my gosh.
Come on. I remember inside me wanting to be like, stop.
Totally.
like what are you talking about? I didn't even understand what she meant because I didn't know what that physically kind of felt like in my body.
Sure.
What, like I understand what raised your arm feels like, but I didn't know push a baby out, felt like.
I mean, yeah, and before you're ready, it's
right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So at this point, I'm not sure, my husband knows the chronology of this better than I do, but to me, it seemed like seconds later, like these 5 burly, huge men come in, the paramedics, into my room. And suddenly it went from, kind of quiet, even though it did accelerate a little bit. But in my mind, it was like, okay, peaceful home birth to, 5 men in my bedroom.
Yeah.
So at this point, my head is kind of spinning because she's yelling, come on, come on, come on. She's thinking like, if we can get this baby out before the paramedics come, then, we don't have to deal with this, even though I called them. And, I remember at this point, I think it was the realization when I was like, when the paramedics came in, I was like, this is ruined. This is done. Done. I give up. I can't do this, I guess, and so I really even though it might sound like I blame my midwife, I really don't. It was totally like an internal thing that happened with me that really made this birth like not the way that I wanted it to go.
Well, and it's really hard in the actual experience of it, and for a long time afterwards, I think it's really hard to see kind of the forest from the trees there that she created an emergency based on the rules and regulations that handicap her, the fear that she has around birth, all the pressures around you being past 42. Like, it's not like it's about somebody's fault. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And going in my head too was like the fear that there was something wrong with my baby.
Of course. Oh my gosh.
Cause she's mentioning like, maybe there's a cord wrapped around its neck or, maybe, whatever it was. So at this point, and my husband's whispering in my ear, I remember it was so sweet. He's like, you can still do this. You don't have to go. And I was like, no, it's done. Like, I was just too scared that there was something wrong with the baby. That really got me. So, the paramedics are there, they get into they're in the ambulance. My husband is like the sweetest, most pushy person in an emergency. Cause they were like, you have to drive in a car. You can't come in the ambulance. He's like, no way. No, I am not leaving her with you guys. Either I come or we're not going. So, and I can't remember what he said exactly, but he got himself in the ambulance. So he's there in the ambulance and they're telling me not to push.
Oh my God.
Like I'm pushing. At this point, like I can feel the baby, wanting to come out and I'm supposed to like hold it in.
It's terrible.
That was the most painful part of the birth. And all the while the paramedics, like they were so sweet. They're trying to tell me jokes. I'm like, are you serious? So they get me in, they wheel me into the ER, right? That's the first place I go to. They determine that the baby is not in distress. So they get me up to the maternity ward. At this point, I think it was like 5 minutes later, the baby, was coming out. But the doctor, just like sliced me open, just like gave me the episiotomy. It was like, didn't even ask, was like, psh, we got to get this baby out. I remember at that point, I was so, I felt so defeated that it was like everything else that I had wanted for that birth. I just was like, whatever, it doesn't even matter. I'd wanted to hold the baby, first thing I'd wanted to.
That's like shut down.
Yeah. I could tell it was the beginning. What I know, in retrospect, it was like the beginning of a postpartum depression that lasted for about 2 years. It wasn't severe, but it was definitely a part of my life. And so my husband's still like rallying for me, he's like, don't take the baby. Do you have to cut the cord? Right. What are you doing? And Gandhi's, oh no, actually the doctor was Dr. Gandhi. My husband asked her, he was like, can we not cut the cord? right now? Can we just let it go out? And she looked at him. I remember the look too. And it like when you're in labor, I was cognizant of things, but I couldn't really act on them because I could tell she looked at him like, if you made more of a case for this, I think I would not cut the cord, but you're asking me as a question. So I'm just going to make that call. And so, she sliced it. And then, they gave you the baby for they gave me Umbranager for a few seconds, it seemed like, and then took him to be weighed and whatever. And my husband, like the whole time is like keeping his hand on him and, going over there to the scale and whatever else they felt they needed to do. And then when the baby came to me, I remember like my second sort of like just utter sadness, feeling like this should feel different. Mm-hmm. That I thought I was supposed to feel ecstatic. I thought I was supposed to be excited about my baby being here. All I feel is like I've been, raped, basically. And then everything after that was actually really pleasant. The nurses were super sweet. My husband told them about this practice that we do after the baby's born, what we call the 40 days, which is, I know a lot of cultures do. It's like a 6-week, 2 days shy of 6 weeks kind of incubation period for the mom and the baby, where we don't go anywhere and we just, bond and people bring us food and stuff like that. So we wanted to start that, but they wouldn't release us like we were prisoners. They wouldn't release us until the pediatrician could, make sure the baby was okay. So he was like, so my husband made sure that we had, at least a room where no nurses were coming in and out of. And they put us at like if you mention like religious beliefs, I feel like people take you really seriously.
Oh yeah.
So we were at the end of the corridor. There was one nurse that was allowed to come in, but anybody else had to clear it with her first. And she would ask us before anybody else came in.
Nice.
So it was nice. And, it was at that point, because so much had gone wrong, I really didn't want to go home. I really didn't want to sleep in the bed that I had been, laboring in. So then my husband went back to the house and cleaned everything up. And got the
he's so good.
Yeah. Because he knew if I went back and the pool was still up and stuff, it would just so hard. And I also needed clothes because I went I was naked. So when we went, I think maybe at the point when I got in the ambulance, I was wearing like a long shirt or something, but that was because my midwife put it on me right before I got in. So yeah, that was my first birth. And for the longest time afterwards, I remember thinking, thank God she was there, because what if I had been, I don't even know what the other scenario would have been, but there could have been something wrong with my baby. And if she hadn't made that call, then, imagine what could have happened. I mean, I probably would have stayed in that state forever. That probably would have been my story about that forever if I hadn't done more research and wanted a different experience the next time. So,
and that intersection right there, like the majority of people do choose to stay in that space because it is easier to not question and do the work on it and research and, to be willing to create a departure of trust from the providers who ultimately caused the trauma and, fake emergencies,
right,
is really deep work that often can be quite painful, ultimately very liberating, but yeah,
you have to want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did. I wanted a different experience. And part of the reason for me, so for a long time, I didn't want any more children because I was like, I don't want to do that again. And also because the birth experience was so traumatic for me and for my son, because when you think about it, he was stuck inside me for over a half an hour, like in the birth canal, because of that ambulance ride. And I can see it in his personality, just like when he was born, he was so upset. He didn't want to be swaddled. He didn't want to be constrained ever. And I I can't say for sure that wouldn't have been part of his personality before, but I really feel that it had something to do with the way he came into the world.
Sure.
So yeah, when actually part of my healing process is, this is funny, it was watching the Duggars.
I don't know.
Have you ever seen that show?
No, I don't know.
It's like 20, I don't know what they got up to. I mean, 19 kids and counting. It started as like 16 kids or whatever. But I was watching this show of like, cause I'd always wanted a really big family, you know, but I didn't know what people had to go through to get there.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I watched this show and I was like, it would be really nice to have more kids. So, the next conception was a conscious one. And
how many years after?
Conception 2, but yeah.
And you felt ready.
Yeah, I felt ready. My first son was sleeping through the night at that point, and he was mostly out of diapers. And, yeah, I felt like I wanted to bring someone else into our family. And I felt like there was somebody. So this is from like on a spiritual level, I guess, when the pregnancy happened, both my husband and I really felt like we were having a girl. And somewhere in the middle of the pregnancy, we were like, wow, it changed. It's somebody different. So I felt like there was still somebody that wanted to come. I still feel like there's somebody, there's another one that wants to come. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. My husband might not be ready for that one, but yeah. Anyway, so I felt like there was another soul that wanted to come into our family. And so we tried for a while. I had to make some adjustments to my diet, which ironically was kind of more of a return to how I was eating before I was married. But I wasn't eating very well after pregnancy. And I was kind of all over the place with my, like, trying stuff and whatever. And maybe if I do this, I'll feel more energetic and whatever. Cause I was really lethargic in the first year of our Renunter's life. So anyway, I changed a few things in my diet, and I was eating a lot more fresh food and stuff like that. And a nutritionist helped me. And we conceived, and we were really excited. And this is more of like a Kundalini yoga thing. We keep it a secret. We're supposed to keep it a secret for the first 120 days after conception, which I was so excited about being pregnant the first time, I didn't do. And then the second time around, I really did try, but because I had already been pregnant once, it was so obvious.
Well, I know about the 120, like when that's when the soul comes in and all that stuff, but I had never heard that you were supposed to keep it a secret.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is that's kind of the time period where if something were going to happen, most likely it would, if the pregnancy were to end, that's kind of the window. And the other thing is just that it's kind of like this sweet little secret between you and your baby and your, and the father. And, yeah, so it, people definitely do it. And I tried, but I remember at some point, maybe in it was pretty close, but my friend just blurted out, she's like, congratulations. And I got so alarmed because I wasn't, super self-aware that I was showing. I was like, who told you? And she's like, I'm an architect. I notice how things,
and you pop sooner with the second. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always wear kind of flowy clothing anyway, but yeah, it was pretty obvious.
So
anyway.
at what point in this process did you start to think, I'm not going to go back to that midwife, and wait a minute, I'll even go a step further and do this myself? Yeah.
So when I was, and I had an inkling that I was pregnant, was at this festival we go to in New Mexico, summer solstice. And I had just missed my period. And since having my first baby, my cycle was more regular. So I noticed. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I could be pregnant. I could be pregnant. This is so exciting. And towards the end of the festival, I was feeling more tired. And I started like not wanting to eat the food that I brought for myself, because I brought myself special food. And, you know, I was noticing, I was like, yeah, my body is kind of different. And on the way home, even before I quote unquote knew I was pregnant, I asked my husband, I was like, how would you feel about just doing it, the two of us, you know, just doing the birth, the two of us? And it was kind of like you know, my husband and I talk about possibilities all the time, and, you know, we don't always do them. So it wasn't like I definitively decided at that moment, but I had that idea then. And when I got home, I was still in the mindset of like, I need, you know, proof. So I immediately, when we drove home, because he didn't want to, you know, we were camping and stuff. He didn't want to deal with going to another, like a clinic while we were in New Mexico and whatever. So I waited till we got back, and I went to a little like midwifery clinic thing, and it was positive, and I was pregnant. I was so excited. And, at that point, I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to do it, because I knew I had some time. Mm-hmm. But when we did start talking about it, we were thinking because I hadn't learned what I then began to learn was, you know, it ended up at the hospital anyway. It ended up costing us so much money to pay that midwife to make a phone call, you know, because we paid out of pocket for the midwifery, for the licensed midwife, and then ended up using our insurance, you know, for the hospital anyway. So it was like, why don't we just go to the hospital first thing? Mm-hmm. They'll pay for it, and we don't have to worry about wasting money, you know, on that. Because what if it happens again? What if I go 42? You know, what if that's just the way I gestate and I, you know, go 42 weeks every time? But that thought was actually what got me thinking about alternative solutions, because whenever we went to a really beautiful looking birth center, and we interviewed this really cool home birth midwife that I had a recommendation from a friend about, you know, and it was really sweet and great. And I did vibe with her. She was also a licensed midwife. It was always like, the question was like, what happens if I go for 42 weeks?
Yeah.
You know, or like, here's what happened the first time. How would you have handled this? And I remember the birth center we were in like an orientation meeting, the woman being like, well, that's probably how it would have gone down here too, you know? And so at this point I'm like, well, gosh, I don't like any of these options. These are, you know, I don't want to put myself through that again, knowingly. So it was a full moon one night. I was laying in bed and I couldn't sleep, which often happens on the full moon. And I just got up and was like, I wonder if people give birth by themselves and just don't even deal with the medical community. And I came across the Indie Birth website, and another website was like this family. They had their own website about unassisted birth. I can't remember which it was, but I watched some videos, and they were talking about how much less painful it was, and how amazing it is to, you know, just have that connection right from the start of not having anybody else holding your baby or telling you what to do. And I was like, I had a lot of questions, because, you know, I did believe the first time that it was a medical, you know, event, mm-hmm. That needed somebody there to support. So I can't remember. Oh, my next step was I just started listening to all of Marin's podcasts, the Indie Birth. What's it called?
Taking Back Birth.
Taking Back Birth. Thank you. Yeah. So I just, every day while I was doing dishes, I would be, you know, if I was in the kitchen or if I was doing something that didn't require me being attentive to my son, then I would be listening to her podcast. And I started learning a ton of stuff I didn't know. And at this point, I realized what had happened the first time, because the first podcast that I listened to of hers was why she quit being a licensed midwife. Mm-hmm. And I just had this epiphany, like, oh my gosh, this was not what I thought it was. This, and it completely, I like saw the event in a completely new light, and it made a lot of sense how I could avoid it. So the next, after that full moon, I kind of went forward in time, but I think I might've listened to that one midwifery podcast that night. The next morning, I told my husband, I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this alone. This makes the most sense to me because, and he knows me. I do all of my best work alone. I'm a super private, independent kind of worker. I collaborate well with others, but when it comes to like being creative and, getting my ideas and my flow going, I don't like people observing me in that process.
Well, and as you're starting to identify why all this horrible stuff went down in your birth, you can start to separate it and be like, wait a minute, it's actually safer to not involve other people.
Right. Well, and that realization came a little later. It was kind of like in layers. But I remember the first thing occurring to me was I really should do things the way I feel most comfortable doing them. Because it doesn't make sense to, do things the way somebody else feels comfortable with them. So that a friend of mine recently asked me, because she's pregnant and she's thinking about maybe doing a free birth for her next pregnancy. She's not quite comfortable with the idea yet now. She was like, I was just telling her that that's not necessarily why everybody chooses to free birth. But for me, I think that was the most, the biggest reason for me was just the freedom of being able to be alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really because of that decision, I felt super empowered. I finally understood why women use that word about pregnancy and birth. It seemed like kind of a ruse after my first time. I was like, I don't get it. But yeah, the prenatal period was really sweet. And I just, like really fed myself well. And, I think also part of it was that I knew how to eat being pregnant, because coming out of being a normal or a non-pregnant woman, I guess, I was eating 3 meals a day, and it was really kind of a crazy adjustment to eating all these snacks and things between meals. I really never got used to it my first pregnancy, but second time around, I was lactating my whole pregnancy anyway, but I had been nursing my son. So I was used to, eating frequently and, drinking a lot of water and doing all this stuff. So it seemed a lot like I figured it out. I was like, I don't really need any coaching on this because I know what my body is like doing this now. And I did a lot of meditation and a lot of yoga, things that I was kind of afraid to do the first time because I didn't really trust my body could make a baby the first time, as silly as that sounds. I was afraid that if I, did too much physical activity and this wasn't like anything I was hearing from anybody else. It was just kind of a quirk within myself that I could somehow like mess things up, So I didn't have that the second time around, and I stayed so healthy. I felt amazing. The first trimester was also not as bad. I remember having some like food aversions, and smells from the refrigerator were not so fun, but I wasn't nauseous or throwing up or anything like that. And, so it was a different experience. It was a different experience all the way around. And I was carrying a different baby too. So it was, so when the birth came around, it was funny because I had been so healthy the entire pregnancy. And right when I went into labor, which didn't end up being my actual labor, but it was on the night of leap year, I think, or the night before of leap year of like the end of February. So I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be a leap year baby. This is so exciting. I caught the flu from my husband And I could feel like it just kind of taking over my body as I'm going through these contractions and going, oh my gosh, I don't like, my husband was so sick and tired because he'd been sick for a few days. And I remember being kind of scared, like, okay, my husband is my whole team and he can't even like, sit up for long periods of time. So thankfully the contractions stopped and we went to bed. And about a week later, I was still sick, but he wasn't. I went into actual labor. And by this point, my oldest son was sick as well. So we were like, my husband had recovered mostly. My son had a really high temperature, and I was kind of like on the down part of the sickness, but still like coughing and stuff. So my sister-in-law came and took my son and took him to urgent care, and we didn't end up seeing him for another 3 days because we just felt like we found out he had the flu, and I was nervous about having him around a newborn.
Yeah.
So he stayed there, and my friend came and like helped my husband just clear the house of all germs and, as much as we could, like cleaning linens and putting pillows out in the sun and stuff like that. And I'm not sure how much of this was actually necessary because one of the doctors that looked at my son later was like, the baby basically had access to that, that flu inside you. So will probably come out immune. But anyway, so we, the birth actually looked almost identical to the first time in terms of how it progressed. It started in the morning and it was really kind of like sweet and lovely and, began. And I remember feeling a lot more relaxed, and my husband set up another birth tub, and as the contractions sort of were getting a little bit more intense, I went into the bathtub and was like just singing to myself and pouring water on my belly, and was just really sweet. And then it, progressed a little more and it got more intense. And I figured out that if I held on to the shower bar where the curtain was and kind of let my body hang there as if like something were falling out of me, it felt really good, and it helped my muscles relax through the, expansions. And so my husband rigged this pole. He had this push-up bar, and he tied this baby sling that I made to it, which is this long piece of fabric, like kind of like those traditional like long piece of fabric slings. He did it kind of like so that it could act as a rope, but also like a hammock that I could kind of lean on when I didn't,
Yeah.
So not that I was completely reclined in it, but I could kind of tilt back and it would support me a little bit. So that was really nice. And I remember just feeling like, wow, yeah. So if I had relaxed more through this the first time around, it wouldn't have felt like electric shocks. And, so that was really nice. And I just felt so free. Like I was I was just like groaning and making all these animal noises that if somebody had been there, I probably wouldn't have, just because of my personality. And I knew that about myself. So I moved again back to the birth tub, and it was not the temperature I wanted it, but it was okay. I got back in it. And at this point, my husband could tell it was like imminent. But I went through this kind of mental doubt, and I was like, I don't think this baby's coming, and this baby, and then he's, just kind of looking at me. And I went, no, this baby has to come. All babies come. All babies come. I'm just talking to myself. And I had made these, I made all these like little positive affirmation things to read, but I don't remember reading any of them. But they were there helping me through it. And so I moved. There's like a bathroom off of that room. And I moved. I was like, I guess I got to get out of the water. And I knew both times too, that I wouldn't want to deliver in the water. I liked, laboring in it, but I did not want my baby coming out in the water for some reason. So I got out and I'm like, oh, and this was so exciting. I think while I was in the water, or maybe when I was getting out, I reached inside and I like felt something squishy. And at the time I was like, that's a really squishy head. But it, it was the sac and it's with my first son too. So it was like, it's just so similar with my first son too. His water didn't break. And I think the midwife ended up breaking it. Until she was yelling, push, 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 So yeah, I'm in the bathroom and I'm kneeling on one, I'm kind of squatting and also kneeling. I'm doing like a half thing. And I'm feeling for, where the baby's, I think, head is. And I remember just feeling like, like kind of just this drop. And it just, the whole, no, I reached in and I tore the sac. I remember doing that. I was just like, this needs to get done. And after that, the baby just slid out. I caught him. I didn't know he was a him at this point because, like I had said before, we thought he was a girl the whole time I was pregnant. Maybe I didn't say that, but we did. And I'm holding the baby and I'm like just so proud of myself. I'm like yelling like, I did it. And then I was like, okay, I have to give credit to you too. Like we did it. Baby, you did a lot of work too. But I was just so like victorious feeling. I felt like I had, just done it and completed it. And, it's just this beautiful full circle that, was amazing. And, it took a little while for me to realize that I didn't know what the sex of the baby was for sure. So I looked down and I just started laughing because it was such a shock. It was like, another boy. That's so funny. Plus he looked exactly like my first baby.
A little repeat.
Exactly. I was like, oh my gosh, same human. So yeah, that was that. And I held him and I kept holding him and I never let him go. And we laid down in bed together and I, delivered the placenta and my husband, went to the kitchen and chopped up little pieces and put it in the freezer for me. Which I did end up taking. And,
how did you feel in the coming weeks?
I felt great. I felt really, really great. My son slept so well. It was alarming. He slept, I think that first night and the nights to come, in like 5-6 hour chunks, which I thought was like just kind of crazy for a newborn. And he, up until the point where he started teething at around, it was August, like maybe 6 months, he was the most angelic, like fussless baby.
Like until he started teething.
Yeah. And then he, and then he was human.
Yeah. And your body felt good afterwards?
Yeah. Yeah. It still feels raw. It's a big physical thing that you go to. So, I definitely had some healing ahead of me.
How did your community respond to this choice? Was there anything other than support?
I kept this very secret. I kept it a secret because, like I've mentioned, I'm a pretty private person. I felt that I really didn't want to get into discussions about it before I had an experience of it with other people.
Yeah, that's smart.
So I really didn't feel like I could,
defend it.
Yeah, I really feel like I could defend it until I did it, you know? So I did tell a few people though that I trusted. And they were supportive, but, supportive because I was an adult and, like it's your choice, not supportive in the sense of like, wow, that sounds like such an awesome idea. I had my neighbor across the street who's actually never had any children. She's so sweet, but she was like really concerned about me because my husband told her, and I can't remember how that came up, but when he did, I was like, why did you tell her?
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were praying like the whole time, her and her husband. And when I told them a little later that we thought maybe we were just going to have 2 kids, she said, oh, thank God. I don't think I could go through that again.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the majority of people have been brainwashed to believe that it is, a medical event that borders on emergency, at any given random time.
Mm-hmm. And this is people who basically expect you to have a home birth. I think most people view it as a change of location and not necessarily a change of paradigm, so it's nicer to be at home than in a hospital, but you want the same stuff.
Right. You're still going to get the
mostly.
Ultrasounds and the tests and the routine stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. What a wild ride you went on.
Yeah. I feel it's funny, but I think I also had to have a second child just so that I could do it again.
It's so healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To get to see like what birth really can be and not have it taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a
also,
big part, I think, of the healing, to be able to be like, that happened to me. That wasn't like me and my boy causing that. That happened to me, which is painful in some ways because it's such a betrayal of perhaps the team or the system or whatever. But it seems like such an important part to be able to identify.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel really blessed that it happened that way the first time, because when you say like it happened to me, it also, I believe we really create our own reality. And I must have needed that in order to have the experience that then followed, because I don't think I would have known to go that quote unquote extreme away from the norm if I hadn't had that very extreme kind of, what could go wrong with that thing. Because a lot of my friends home birth or have home birthed and nothing really so bad happened.
Totally. I mean, yeah, if you had like a within the margins, quote unquote, normal home birth experience, then you probably just would have hired her again, which would have been fine. You probably would have had another quote unquote normal experience. Right.
Yeah. But I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to feel, like you said, like what it can really be like. And
yeah, it's pretty unmatched. It just like, I mean, it's such a deeply personal and spiritual experience, but also like on the whole that you can know that everything we've ever learned and heard about birth and our bodies and, to not trust it and to put what's the right word? Not just trust, but like blind trust into a system and other people that somehow they're going to know better than you. Which, and then both your postpartum experiences really speak to, what happens in your birth when you are mistreated and disempowered versus feeling your own agency and making your own decisions.
Yeah. Recovery time was way shortened.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank God,
like
because
not as much to recover from. Yeah, and you got another kid for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing all those stories. It's really...
Yeah, thank you for asking me.
Yeah, it's did you get to sing at all in your second birth?
Yeah, when I was in the bathtub, I was singing to myself.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.